God. Hi, everyone. Here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Drake album, Scorpion. This is the latest full-length album from the Six God from Champagne Poppy. Drake, Canadian actor, singer, songwriter, entertainer, Aubrey Graham. He's back, and if you didn't already know, he's at a kind of weird point in his career. Back when Drake was a mere Lil Wayne protege and was dropping super lovey-dovey pop rap songs for a mostly female audience, while his material wasn't all that great, the appeal of it at least made sense. Eventually, Drake would go on to win over most of the rap-listening audience with moody fusions of hip-hop music and R&B on albums like Take Care and Nothing Was the Same, and his brand grew even larger from there with some of the most pivotal points in his music career so far. One, his If You're Reading This It's Too Late mixtape, which I think is kind of a high watermark in his career. Also his kind of explosive collaborative project with Future, What a Time to Be Alive. And those super viral Meek Mill diss tracks. In that beef, even with Drake being exposed on the ghostwriter front, he still came out ahead. At this point, it felt almost like Drake could do nothing wrong artistically. And maybe Drake is aware of that, because it seems like he's spent most of his time since trying to test that very premise. Pretty much everything Drake has done since has seen him squandering his full potential to some degree. Whether it's the very bloated, underwhelming, and occasionally cringy views, or the More Life release that he put out a little while back, which is essentially filler, the album, but somehow it's okay because it's a playlist. And then there's what's really the biggest L of his career so far, and that was his whole Pusha T beef that went down recently, where Drake essentially responded to Pusha with this duppy freestyle after Push sort of put some bars for him and Lil Wayne and Birdman and the final track of his latest record, Daytona. Pusha T has been throwing bars at these guys for years. Why Drake decided right now was the right time to respond, I don't know. Maybe he was kind of feeling himself because of his elevated status in the music industry, also kind of maybe having a bit of invincibility, so to speak, off of the whole Meek Mill win. Although, let's be honest, the brutality of that exchange came more from Meek Mill's horrid, failed, flat response blowing up in his face than it did from Drake's lyricism. And Pusha T is obviously not going to be the pushover that Meek Mill was. So while Drake had a pretty formidable response to Pusha, Pusha's clapback after that completely cut Drake open and just threw his entrails all over social media, talking about this Adidas press run he had planned with his kid, which nobody knew about at the time, exposing him as like a deadbeat dad, or, you know, calling him out as not having much contact with his son, calling into question his racial identity, making fun of his parents and his upbringing, also making fun of Noah Forty's illness. It was so mean. Without question, Pusha's response here is one of the coldest and most destructive diss tracks ever. It put Drake in a total checkmate, and his only response to the whole thing was a little Instagram story post where he essentially explained the front cover image of the single, and that's it. The whole beef just disappeared from there. And it was an eerie silence, which caused a lot of fans to wonder on this forthcoming album, which had already been slated for release. Are we going to hear Drake address some or all of this in some way, shape, or form? I mean, he already dropped singles from this thing like Nice for What and God's Plan and I'm Upset, which were clearly recorded prior to all of this. There's most likely a ton of other material on this thing that was recorded prior as well. Would Drake be laying down any tracks or bars in between this span of time that would do anything, address anything, get to the heart of anything? Also, what direction is Drake going in artistically on this album? It's 2 discs. Are they different? Is he changing up his usual style at all? Is he still going to be trying to make watered-down dancehall music? Well, the short answers to those are yes, yes, and no, not anymore, not really. I don't think the sounds or musical styles respective to disc 1 and 2 are really mutually exclusive. But generally, the second disc of this thing has a bit more moody alternative R&B vibe than the first. And as far as changing up his style, generally, Scorpion is one of Drake's most stripped back records yet. The beats and flows on this thing are some of the simplest in Drake's entire catalog. And this can be a pro when Drake is trying to get across a really catchy or relatable idea. But it can also be a con when the musical and lyrical ideas of a given song are so meager that Drake has really kind of given us very little to hang on. And yeah, Drake does give the dancehall ting kind of a break here. So because the two discs of this thing are different, I have slightly different opinions of both of them. I think disc 1 is much more enjoyable and consistent, though not by much. A lot of the material on this disc is kind of average by Drake standards. I would actually call it quintessential Drake, right from the first track, Survival, which features a very spacey trap beat, very faint, haunting tones hanging in the background. And of course, Drake tops this with bars that simultaneously portray him as mega successful, but also very sad. Especially with bars like "My Mount Rushmore is me with 4 different expressions," which is so hilariously egotistical, it makes Kanye West seem well-adjusted. Not to mention, this track is one of multiple times on this record where Drake seems to truly think that his success and fame is as a result of some kind of divine intervention. I mean, lots of artists out there thank God when they make it, and that's cool, that's totally fine, but literally there are multiple points here where Drake seems to be under the impression that God has handpicked him to make it in this music thing. This intro track, it's not a bad sound, it's not a bad vibe, but it's just kind of a vibe. And there are also 24 more tracks on this thing, and since this is the bar that the intro track is setting, of course, there are going to be moments that are much lower than this. And they come rolling in quick with the song Non-Stop, which is truly one of the more uneventful tracks in the track listing. So little goes on in this song lyrically and instrumentally. Really, the only defining factor of this track is that Drake is trying to sound really cold and really tough, which after the way you just kind of slithered out of that beef with Pusha T, I don't understand why you would ever try to act tough ever again. I mean, the closing track on the first disc has Drake saying, "Too many Walt Disney characters, mouses and goofs. I mean, you know I love a challenge, but challenged by who? Challenged by who? Not Pusha T, apparently." No. No thank you. Don't act like you're taking all comers when you're not. Especially with bars like, "I would rather lose my leg than lose their respect, but that'll never happen the way I'm watching my step." Please, just give me some catchy songs, like maybe a few Marvin's Rooms here and there, and let's just call it a day. But Drake can't even do that on this record, because if Drake's career at this very moment in time is defined by anything, it's inconsistency. When one of your major singles to this album is the song "I'm Upset," something is wrong. It's one of the most painfully boring Drake songs, period. It's a do-nothing instrumental that is total trash. The flow is so basic, it just pretty much sounds like Drake talking. And the lyrics are loaded with so much personal minutia in the grander scheme of things, it means absolutely nothing. Which is also partially an issue with the laundry list of other tracks on here. To fall deeply in love with it, you have to be so obsessed with Drake as a pop culture icon that you'll basically eat up anything that comes out of his mouth. Because the portrayal is so flat and uninteresting and effortless. There are some narrative bright spots in the track list, like Emotionless, where the high-stakes decisions in Drake's life seem to have very heavy and important outcomes that he kind of filters through a very relatable lens. I like a lot of the themes that come up in this track of the very poisonous entertainment industry. Then he's sort of outdoing his idols and the greats in the genre that he came up in, and that kind of creates an awkward situation where he feels sort of isolated. Then we have Drake reminiscing over his past and kind of losing touch of the genre that he exists in, the new competition. We get some fatherhood bars as well, him dealing with misinformation in the media, talking about how he's not going to approach blogs if the story is wrong because a wise man once said nothing at all. I mean, there are some very smart, cool, and philosophical bars peppered throughout this track that I like a lot, but since when has Drake not been the artist to stand up and speak out? Since when is Drake not the artist who lays it all out there? Since when is Drake not the ultimate honest actor? So up until this point, that has either been a facade and Drake hasn't been an honest actor, or he's decided that honesty isn't so important when he has something to hide. Either way, the track has a great flow, structure, instrumental. I love the Mariah Carey sample. The song 8 out of 10 as well, in my opinion, is a pretty powerful cut, definitely a big boss and very glamorous highlight. Sandra's Rose is another highlight for me as well, a track that is a tribute to his past, his mother as well. Kind of sounds like one of those super inspirational, personal, and triumphant Drake songs that he typically ends a project off with, but now we're kind of getting it in the midst of all of the rest of the track list. And as much as I do like it, the bars on this track are such a mixed bag. This one bar about his uncle trying to help him out with stones and crystals, and it would take more than that for him to control his issues. Also him saying that these guys want a classic and that's just 10 of these songs. I like that a lot. Then him saying he's been stabbed in the back so many times he just walks backwards. But then talking about how, like Charlemagne the God, he goes through like the lightest and darkest patches, sort of referring to the different colored pigmentation of his skin on his face. That's such a stupid thing to say. Then, on the song Mob Ties, Drake pulls out this amazing Young Thug impression. Like, it is dead on. It is, like, scary accurate. I mean, the song is okay, but it literally sounds like Drake is playing himself and then his own feature artist on the cut. It kind of comes off like a halfway decent track from Young Thug's Beautiful Thugger Girls. I mean, Drake has been called out before for stealing other artists' sounds and flows and so on and so forth, but this is like a new level. And meanwhile, Talk Up is a very grimy, dark, mean-muggin' banger whose credibility comes mostly from Jay-Z landing on the track. For whatever reason, the song sounds slightly quieter than a lot of the others in the track listing. A weird technical issue that I wouldn't have expected on a record with a budget this big. But still, that ex-Zimmerman line on Jay-Z's verse was pretty badass. Not only that, but you know, just generally Hove's bars on the track are very nice. It's a good lyrical pick-me-up after such a slog up until this point. And we're pretty much only done with the first disc here, which overall, like, I would probably rate as like a decent to strong 5. Maybe a light 6 on like a good sunny day. There's more. I mean, even though this thing kind of speeds by in a very quick 90 minutes, it is not a fun 90 minutes. Especially in this second leg, which is longer and more of an artistic wasteland, which, as I said earlier, features more singing, more spacey R&B tunes, which, in theory, I don't necessarily mind. I don't mind Drake as a singer. I think his singing has, in fact, improved over the years. But on most of the slower and more melodic cuts in this second disc, Drake isn't really providing his fans with much of a song. It's pretty much skeletal, boring beats, Drake moaning out into oblivion, and some very washed-out synthesizers. On the song Summer Games, Drake kind of goes synth pop. It sounds like an awful Postal Service song. Things kind of pick up on the song Nice for What, which, I mean, I love, but I kind of already knew that I loved it going into the record as a single. It's one of those super catchy, patronizing bangers where Drake basically kind of throws a lot of empty platitudes and hollow compliments at his listeners that are maybe a little bit more self-conscious. That's a real one, and your reflection, without a follow, without a mention. It's kind of like Drake is telling me, you the best, you the best. The beat switch up at the end is really great too, kind of throws it back to like an 80s hip-hop remix of some sort. It's a banger. Again, it's a great track, but it feels super out of place shoulder to shoulder with these super jaded alt R&B crooners. Miraculously, the song Ratchet Happy Birthday is actually a highlight for me on this thing, but only because it's so hilariously goofy, which seems entirely intentional though. I mean, the track features these really awkward and silly synthesizer samples and piano arpeggios. Drake is singing on top of this track with some really warbly auto-tune, and lyrically it's like he's making a serious effort not to be so serious, with lines like Reese's Pieces, don't be ridiculous, and it's your brrrr. I like that Drake is kind of letting go of his sad boy aesthetic on this track a little bit, getting a little playful, getting a little tongue-in-cheek. But again, why Drake wanted to put this cut on the sadder and more depressing of the two discs, I don't know. There is so little in the way of like a logical flow across all the tracks on this side of the album. Then we have the song That's How You Feel. What is the mastering deal on this track? The synthesizers, the bass, it sounds so overpowering and kind of clippy. Do we not care about how this album album sounds? Are we literally just going to throw anything out there with not a care in the world? We are basically Eminem now. It's to the point where the sound quality of my project doesn't matter. It's also to the point where Drake seems to be losing direction of himself in his own songs. Like this track featuring these very underwhelming Drake verses bookended by like these really weird Nicki Minaj live snippets. It's just so random and unnecessary. Also, these live Nicki Minaj vocal samples sound more interesting than even Drake himself does on his own song. The appearance of Future as well on the song Blue Tint just kind of seems like a distraction from the lack of a coherent song idea on this cut too. Then we have the song In My Feelings, where Drake is essentially dropping like a simping anthem. Kiki, do you love me? Are you riding? Comes through with this rap verse that he's recycled at least a few times recently. Like, the amount of legitimately interesting song ideas in the first leg of this album were already very few and far between to begin with, and now it's like he's starving people that have made it this far into the album even more. The funny thing about this song is that even though my phone is nowhere near me, I still feel like I'm just flipping through Instagram when listening to it. I'm just on Twitter right now. Coming after this, we have a track that was highly anticipated by a lot of people, the song Don't Matter to Me. And the reason for this anticipation is because Michael Jackson actually appears on the song. Or rather, a vocal snippet from like an older recording session that didn't make the light of day up until now is what made it onto the song. Drake did Michael so wrong. So wrong on this track. Did you need to expose Michael like that? Did you really need to? Like, I know that Michael Jackson wasn't a god, he was not a perfect being, he was a man, and a very flawed one at that, but the dude's vocal chops were insane, the dude's vocal track record was great, and you were clearly throwing out there a moment in his career where vocally he was not really at peak performance, and it seems like you don't really care. It seems like all you really care about is that you got the feature, you got the appearance, you got the clout, which is kind of one of the sad things about the music industry current day, because a lot of artists who have passed away, like their older material, their back catalog, their lost tracks, their sort of undercover gems, all that stuff, it's all kind of available for grave robbery to the highest bidder. On top of that, Michael's voice is so heavily manipulated on this song, like he sounds so washed out and disembodied, like he's a ghost or a hologram or something. The way he's placed into the track, like his introduction into the track, is really awkward too. Even though disc 2 has been mostly awful up until this point, it does end much stronger than it started. The song After Dark features some pretty sensual grooves, some very funny lead falsetto vocals on the hook that I like quite a bit. Ty Dolla $ign features on the song, sings much better than Drake does on the track, and pretty much steals the show. The song Final Fantasy is easily one of Drake's most sexually explicit tracks yet. It's kind of playful, it's kind of odd, but whatever potential it had is totally squandered by the weird and very awkward beat switch up in the middle of it, which features an odd Maury audio snippet like, oh, he looks like Drake, the baby looks like Drake, woo. Also, bars like slashing like Guns N' Roses. Oh, and Drake reminding us that he likes to have a glass of wine at sundown, like a white woman from the suburbs. The finishing track, March 14th, which clearly was not planned before this whole Pusha T thing. This song is essentially an awkward attempt at connecting with his son through song. I mean, hopefully Drake fulfills the role of fatherhood on a personal level, because this first attempt at trying to make his audience privy to this whole situation just felt very, very uncomfortable. Especially since it still seems like he would have much rather had this situation slip into the background. But goddamn, what a slog this album was. I'm really glad it's over, I'm really glad I'm done with it, but geez. I just pray for a day where Drake gets back to writing more focused albums with stronger, clearer directions, instead of just trying to pad this stuff out into oblivion. But yeah, those are basically my thoughts on that. I like the second disc even less than the first. I would probably give it like a light to decent 3, and I would average both of these discs out to pretty much like a light to decent 4. And there we go. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe, and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Drake, Scorpion, forever.